All Exchange data is actually stored in a database. The databases, there are actually multiple databases, and again, I'm an Exchange System Manager, and I want to just show you these as I talk about them. Notice that if I go into the first administrative group, and if I go to my server, notice on my servers, there's a storage group. Now right here, I've got two storage groups. I've got a first storage group and a second storage group. Now in my first storage group, you'll notice I've got a mailbox store and a public folder store. Now each one of these stores is a logical database, and in each one of these there are two separate server. MDB data by default is where the data is stored. For the first mailbox store, for that default first storage group, PRIV1 private 1 EDB and PRIV1 STM. What's the difference? Well, different types of data are stored in different databases, and they're related to each other. On the public folder side, notice there's PUB1 EDB, PUB1 STM. That's the defaults on that first store. Now, let's talk about exactly what this EDB stuff is and the STM. EDB, as it turns out, is data that is saved from a MAPI client. So if we save data using Outlook, then most of that data is going into the EDB file. If I save data coming from an HTTP, like from Outlook Web Access, Internet Explorer type things, it's going to save it in STM because it has to render that information differently. Exchange used to convert this back and forth depending on what you needed. Well, what it does now is if I submit it through Outlook, it stores it here. If I submit it through the Internet, it stores it here. Then when I read it, if I read it back off the Internet, it can just read it right out of here without having to convert it. If I try to read it with Outlook, at that point in the background, invisible to the user, transparent to the user, conversion will occur. So that's how our data is actually stored. Also, I want to show you one other thing. I'm just going to minimize this for now, and you'll notice that in the public folder in the first storage, that's the way those things were stored. Well, notice in Mark's new public folder store, I want you to notice how this was set up. In my public folder store, all the new stores that are created, and keep in mind, I created a new store. Right here, if you remember in an earlier video, we created that store. When I created that store, it created, notice, Mark's Public Store EDB and Mark's Public Store STM. The database files are going to match the name of what I created up. Notice Mark's new public folder store. That was another one I had created a little earlier. If I go to my particular store, for example, I'll right-click this one and go to Properties. Notice on the database, I can determine where the Exchange database is and where the streaming database is. Okay, notice I can browse and change this. So that's what's going on. Everything we store is actually going into a database. Also, another clue, this is something that's going to need to be backed up. This is how we back up our Exchange data. So our data is stored in stores, and notice they're stored inside storage groups. And we'll talk about storage groups and data storage strategy in the next video.